Before you decide this video is not about you, before you defend yourself, before you say, I'm not like that, pause. Because most damage in marriage is not done by cruel people. It's done by unaware people. If you're listening to this as a wife and a small part of you feels uncomfortable right now, that discomfort is not an attack. It's an invitation. And if you turn away today, you may also be turning away from the last chance to fix what is quietly breaking. This is not a video about bad women. It is a mirror for women who love, but may be hurting the very person they vowed to protect. And there are marriages that collapse loudly. Arguments, accusations, doors slammed. But most marriages don't end that way. Most marriages end quietly. In rooms where nothing is said. In beds where two people lie awake facing opposite sides. In homes where laughter used to live, but no one remembers when it left. The man still comes home. He still provides. He still tries. But something inside him has learned to go silent. And the most painful part? He doesn't know how to explain what's wrong. Because on the surface, everything looks fine. Whole people see her and say, you're lucky, your wife is strong. She's confident, she's outspoken, she's independent. But strength without tenderness becomes pressure. Confidence without humility becomes distance. Independence without connection becomes loneliness. And slowly, the man disappears emotionally. Not because he wants to, but because staying present hurts too much. If even one of these words feels like it might be describing you, do not skip this video. Because ignoring truth doesn't make it go away. It only makes it permanent. Stay, listen. This may be the moment that saves what still can be saved. No one prepares you for the kind of loneliness that happens inside marriage. This man didn't stop loving his wife. He stopped feeling safe enough to express it. Every time he spoke, it became an argument. Every time he shared, it was dismissed. Every time he needed peace, he was met with control, criticism, or silence. So his mind adapted. He learned that silence keeps the peace. He learned that emotional distance reduces conflict. He learned that withdrawing is safer than trying again. Not because he is weak, but because the human brain protects itself from repeated emotional pain. Poor psychologically, when someone feels constantly monitored, corrected, or invalidated, their nervous system enters survival mode. Love stops being a place of rest and becomes a place of tension. And once love becomes unsafe, the heart begins to shut its doors, quietly, slowly, without announcement. Or, this is how marriages begin to die. Without betrayal, without affairs, without obvious abuse, just unmet emotional needs, unspoken resentment, and patterns no one stopped in time. And the hardest truth? Many wives causing this pain are not evil, careless, or intentional. They are wounded. They are afraid. They are repeating behaviors they were never taught to question. But unintentional harm still harms. That is why this documentary exists. Not to accuse, not to shame, but to name patterns that quietly destroy intimacy so healing can finally begin. If you're still listening, it means part of you cares, and care is the beginning of change. But change requires honesty, especially with yourself. If you recognize even one pattern in this video and choose to ignore it, one day you may look back and realize the warning came, and you scrolled past it. Stay with this. Your marriage deserves your courage. Captive wife, helicopter wife, jealous wife. Control rarely announces itself as control. It often arrives wearing the face of concern. It starts with questions, simple ones. Where are you? Who is that? Why did it take you so long to reply? At first, it feels like interest, like care, like someone who doesn't want to lose you. But slowly, the questions multiply. The tone changes. The pauses between answers become evidence, and without realizing it, the man begins to live under inspection. He checks his phone twice before replying, not to hide anything, but to avoid the stress that follows. He edits his words, shortens explanations, stops sharing details, not because he has something to hide, but because honesty has become exhausting. This is how love becomes a cage, not through violence, not through threats, but through constant emotional pressure that never allows the heart to rest. All, psychologically, this fear of abandon, fear of comparison, fear of not being enough. A woman who controls often believes she is protecting the relationship, but what she is actually protecting is her anxiety. And anxiety does not create safety, it creates surveillance. And the human mind cannot feel loved while being constantly evaluated. When someone feels monitored, their nervous system stays alert. They stop relaxing. They stop opening up. They stop coming home emotionally, even when they are physically present. There is a difference between care and control. Care asks, "Are you okay?" Control asks, "Prove that you're loyal." And over time, the man begins to feel like a suspect in his own marriage. Jealousy adds another layer. Every female name becomes a threat. Every conversation becomes suspicious. Every delay becomes a crime scene. He starts distancing himself from people, not because he wants to, but because peace at home demands it. And this is where resentment quietly forms. Not explosive anger, not loud complaints, just a slow emotional withdrawal, because the heart cannot thrive where trust is missing. All healing does not begin with more questions. It begins with less fear. The wife who wants her husband closer must first create a space where he can breathe. Trust is not built by checking. It is built by believing. Freedom does not destroy love. It reveals it. Some women try to control because they are afraid to lose. Others control because they never learned how to mature emotionally. And that brings us to the next pattern, where marriage stops being a partnership and starts feeling like parenting. Baby wife, almighty wife, proud wife. She is grown, but emotionally, she still expects to be carried. She avoids responsibility. She reacts instead of reflects. She sulks, withdraws, or explodes when things don't go her way. And the man, slowly, becomes tired. Not because he doesn't love her, but because love has turned into constant emotional management. He explains, he reassures, he apologizes, even when he's unsure what he did wrong. Over time, he realizes something painful. There is no space for his own emotions here. Psychologically, emotional immaturity often comes from environments where feelings were either overprotected or never corrected. Some people were never taught how to self-regulate, how to pause, how to take responsibility for their reactions. So marriage becomes the place where all unresolved emotions are released. Then there is pride. The wife who is always right, never apologizes, never listens, only waits to respond. Pride silences conversation. It turns dialogue into competition. And slowly, the man stops trying to be understood, because understanding is never returned. A marriage cannot survive when one person must always shrink for the other to feel big. Healing begins with humility, not humiliation, not self-erasure, but the quiet strength to say, "I may be wrong. I hear you. I will grow." All emotional maturity is not perfection. It is accountability, and accountability restores respect. Widower's wife, absent wife, workaholic wife. There is a specific kind of loneliness that only married people understand. It is not the loneliness of being single. It is heavier than that. It is the loneliness of having someone and still carrying life alone. He wakes up early, handles responsibilities, solves problems, carries stress, and when he turns to share the weight, there is no one there emotionally. She is present in the house, but absent in connection. Some wives are not cruel, they are simply unavailable. Their mind is elsewhere. Their energy is consumed. Their attention belongs to work, pressure, exhaustion, or survival. So the man stops talking because every attempt to connect feels like interrupting something more important. Hall, psychologically, emotional absence teaches the brain a painful lesson. You are on your own. Once the mind accepts that, it stops reaching out. This is how husbands become emotionally self-contained, not by choice, but by necessity. When emotional absence continues, some wives seek fulfillment elsewhere, not always with other people, but with the outside world. And that leads us to another quiet fracture. The widower's wife does not insult. She does not shout. She simply does not show up. No encouragement, no partnership, no shared burden. He becomes strong, but strength built alone eventually becomes distance. All workaholism adds another layer. Providing becomes an excuse for absence. Money replaces presence. Responsibility replaces intimacy. But the human heart does not bond with provision. It bonds with availability. Healing begins with one truth. Being needed is not the same as being loved. And being loved requires presence, not constant attention, just emotional availability. Public angel, home devil wife, street life wife, social media wife. She smiles easily outside, laughs freely, speaks softly. People admire her warmth. But at home, the tone changes. Silence replaces kindness. Irritation replaces patience. Coldness replaces care. And the man notices, not immediately, but eventually he watches her energy rise for strangers and disappear for him, and something inside him begins to ache. Psychologically, some people pour themselves outward because public spaces feel safer than intimacy. Out there, they are admired, validated, untouched by expectations. At home, they must be real, and real requires vulnerability. Social media intensifies this pattern. Attention becomes constant. Validation becomes instant. Connection becomes shallow but frequent. The phone receives more affection than the person sitting beside them. The danger is subtle. The marriage doesn't explode, it fades, because intimacy cannot survive on leftovers. Healing begins with reordering priorities, not abandoning the world, but remembering who should receive your first softness. Marriage is not where we rest after exhaustion. It is where we are meant to be safe enough to recharge. Or when emotional neglect and disconnection persist, tension replaces tenderness. And some homes become emotionally unsafe, not because of violence alone, but because of constant harm. Toxic wife, bossy wife, slave driver wife, violent wife. Some wounds are not visible. They are formed through words, tone, constant correction. The home becomes a place of tension where one wrong move triggers conflict. He begins to calculate everything he says, not to deceive, but to survive emotionally. Psychologically, repeated criticism activates the brain's threat response. The body does not feel love, it feels danger. And when the body feels danger, it withdraws. Control, disguised as leadership, turns partnership into hierarchy. Respect disappears when one person dominates, and where respect dies, intimacy follows. Or healing requires courage, not control, not louder voices, but gentleness. Because peace cannot be forced, it must be cultivated. When safety disappears, distance grows, and distance often opens the door to secrecy, betrayal, and broken trust. Secretive wife, flirtatious wife, seductive wife, unfaithful wife. Betrayal rarely begins with action. It begins with distance, with hiding, with private worlds, with emotional doors quietly closing. The man senses it before he knows it. Something feels off. Conversations shorten, phones turn face down. Trust weakens not because of proof, but because of intuition. Psychologically, secrecy creates insecurity. Even before betrayal occurs, the mind reads inconsistency as danger, and danger erodes safety. And healing here is slow. Trust cannot be demanded. It must be rebuilt through transparency, not perfection. Consistency. Dirty wife, irresponsible wife, stingy wife, addicted wife, prayerless wife. Homes reflect inner states. Disorder often mirrors emotional exhaustion. Neglect often signals inner emptiness. Man, when responsibility disappears, respect follows. When discipline fades, trust weakens. Healing does not begin with blame. It begins with asking, what inside me is hurting enough to make me withdraw? Restoring the inner life restores the home. This documentary was not created to accuse. It was created to interrupt patterns before they become permanent damage. Awareness is mercy, and reflection is an act of love. If you recognized yourself anywhere in this story and choose to dismiss it, one day, silence may replace what could have been healed. Change does not require perfection. It requires honesty. Stay with this truth. Your marriage deserves your courage. Like, comment, share, and subscribe so we can heal more women.